Okay, so I'm going to do a little reading for Asexual Awareness Week 2015 in Sydney. And my reading is from Brown and Grey, which is a zine for asexual and asexual people of colour. And so the one that I'm going to read is by Sebastian Grace, and it's called What's Race and Rad Got to Do with It? Musings of a Transracially Adopted Asexual. So, bio. Sebastian is a gender-fluid, romantic, asexual immigrant and transracial adoptee. She is of Chinese descent but grew up in England. Sebastian now resides in a large North American city where she's a student and a writer. When you meet me, I will not look at you. I will not look at the space behind you. I will look at the space behind you, your hands or your clothing, anywhere but your eyes. I remember that it is social convention to look people in the eye, so I redirect my gaze, but I am too late. You have already noticed. I'm not being rude. I have reactive attachment disorder, RAD. I was born sometime in late February or early March in the 90s in a tiny Chinese village. I spent the first 4 months of my life in an orphanage, without meaningful human interaction and without adequate mental stimulation. When my parents adopted me, I was incapable of engaging with people. I don't know how to react to touch and emotion. Among the characteristics of RAD are difficulties communicating emotionally, an aversion to touch, control issues, and a lack of conscience with the absence of guilt, remorse, or regret. I could never figure out how to make friends in school, and it wasn't for a lack of trying. I found people with similar interests and hobbies, but in the end, my emotional unavailability damaged my relationships with them. When my relatives hug me, I have to consciously make myself hug them back. My facial expressions do not match what I feel, and my voice remains a steady monotone, unless I try and vary it. I hate being touched, and I do not like being looked at directly. My parents tried to correct my behaviour, pointing out the instances where I did not make eye contact or when physical responses were inappropriate. Since I grew up believing that something was wrong with me, I believed the same thing when it came to my asexuality. In the heteronormative world of compulsory sexuality, it never occurred to me that, if I didn't like any form of physical interaction, and sex especially, that there could be a word for me, and that such a word could refer to a sexual orientation. When I realised that I didn't like sex, which seemed to be the only way to validate a romantic relationship, I assumed that this was just another part of me to be corrected. I made every mistake in the book. I thought I had to have sex to know for sure that I didn't like it, so I did. I tried again, under the assumption that I was doing it wrong or that I hadn't found the right person. I experimented. I consented willingly multiple times with different people, but eventually gave up. Once, I told a partner that I didn't care whether or not we had sex. We still had sex. I started to avoid my romantic partners out of fear we would have sex when I saw them. I felt like I could not articulate that I loved them and found them attractive, but I didn't want to have sex. I couldn't tell them that I was not able to meet their expectations and sexual needs. I could never bring myself to share personal problems with them either, even though they told me theirs. They cried and protested that they wanted to help me, but I coldly refused to let them. I couldn't explain my feelings to them in a way that I deemed accurate or satisfactory, so I never tried. Asexual survivors of trauma and abuse, as well as ACEs with disabilities, are consistently excluded from ACE spaces because our existence defies the asexual ideal. The normative asexual community does not like us. We make asexual look too difficult to explain to the public. Representing us is too much work, we're too diverse, and it is easier for them to pretend we don't exist. According to mainstream asexual educators who want to reassure the public, there is no need to worry. Asexuals are just like you. Asexuals aren't abused. There's nothing wrong with asexuals. Nothing causes asexuality. Asexuals are normal. Apparently, we're just people who don't want to have sex. Yet, many of us are not normal. Discovering asexuality was pivotal for me, and I immediately linked it to my RAD, but my own community told me that I couldn't claim the identity. The relationship between my experiences and my asexuality should not have a bearing on the legitimacy of my orientation. I admit that I don't know the causes of asexuality or whether there can be a cause at all for me, but my histories led me to the conclusion that I was asexual. When I first learned of asexuality, I registered it as a white orientation, an identity that belonged to white people only. I didn't know any asexuals of colour or racialised aces, and my own prejudices probably played into the assumption as well. Visibility, especially when race and ethnicity are involved, is crucial to defining asexuality. When the voice of asexuality is white, when the photographs of asexuals at Pride are of white aces, when the people spreading information about asexuality are all white, aces of colour are left out. Being an asexual of colour and an ace whose narrative does not fit the ideal mould is difficult. There is no space for us at all in the dialogue of being between white, neurotypical, untraumatized aces. Representation matters more than I can explain. When I was struggling to validate my asexuality, I looked everywhere for something, anything, that could be a sign that I was right. I looked at the literature of asexuality and I looked at the media. There was no indication that people like me could be asexual or that they even existed. The immense dislocation I felt and continue to feel from my personal relationships and from my family is actually magnified within the ace community. Sometimes I believe that it is my failure to interact effectively with a community that means that I can't participate in it, and difficult not to feel the way when the community tells me that my other issues prevent me from actually being asexual. The anti-trauma discourse in asexual spaces is violent. I know other aces are affected too, especially considering the statistics on violence and trauma experienced by racialized people and the notable dip in quality and frequency of healthcare we receive. We are a visible minority within a marginalized group who are silenced and told to leave our own space. I never heard or read anything about asexuality and transracial adoption. There is, of course, so much to say. While my experience is unique, there are parts that will resonate with other transracially adopted aces. For me, being transracially adopted highlights the intersection of race and trauma. Our identities are disclaimed through the denial of our asexualities due to trauma and its lasting effects, as well as through the systematic erasure of aces of colour.